Crime is always a topic of concern for Jackson residents. What steps would you propose as a councilman to deter crime, and how would you fund your proposal? 3 minutes for your answers. We'll start with you, Mr. Foote.
What steps would I take to deter crime, and what's the rest of the question?
And how would you fund the proposal?
Fund the proposal. I don't know the answer to how we're going to deter crime. I do think it is a key issue. Safety is a key issue to economic development, and people have to feel safe. If intellectual capital or creative people, they're going to go where they feel well treated, where they're well treated by the tax code, where they're well treated and they feel safe. And it's imperative for economic development purposes to have a safe community. But to be honest with you, I haven't talked with all of the law enforcement officials I'd like to. So I don't have a specific answer to that question, but I certainly think it's a high priority.
I've got several friends in state law enforcement. I've talked to police officers here locally since I've been campaigning. I think one of the biggest issues we face in crime is that there's a problem with JPD and some of the corruption that's going on there. I think Lee Vance is going to come in and do a good job in replacing some of those the officers that are not doing what they need to do to keep the city of Jackson safe. But we've got to retain the good officers and make sure that we do a good job in providing funding for them and make sure that they're well paid and well trained and that they have the resources they need to be successful. I think we're going to have to cut back and as a lot of the other candidates have talked about, look department by department and be able to find extra money to be able to take care of the three big issues within crime, within the infrastructure, and within education.
Mr. Wilson.
For one thing, the GI Bill that I propose is self-funding. It's revenue neutral and it puts more cops on the beat, and that is the first step to bringing more police and more safety to the city. The second step is to go through the entire budget, including the police and fire budget, and look at where there are places where we can make adjustments. When I was a kid, my dad worked for the Highway Patrol. He worked in their forensics department and was a staff photographer, did some of the staff artwork there for the forensics division. When he was leaving there, he went into the chief and was talking, doing the exit interview, and said, just so you know, you can take all of the work I do over to DeVille Camera, and they can do it for less cost than the one chemical out of 12 that I buy. That was a huge savings for the Mississippi Highway Patrol. We need to look at every department, including the police, see where there is waste and convert it into resources. I want to push code enforcement, because if you push code enforcement, you're going to be solving more crimes, you're going to be fixing up the areas that are blighted, that are a haven for criminals, and you're going to instill a value in the community that unites neighborhoods, and the strongest thing that can prevent crime is a united neighborhood. And I want to see the city and the police as a whole assigning officers to helping strengthen neighborhood associations and teach communities how to look out for one another, how to help each other, and how to help be the eyes and ears of the police force. That's one of the biggest things we need right there, is just additional involvement from the community. That doesn't cost anything. So code enforcement, more cops in a revenue neutral way, cutting the graft, cutting the problems. And actually, as a city councilman, one of my first things will be to call the county and ask why our police officers are not being called as witnesses when they arrest people and we get no bills, where the grand jury does not return an indictment. Our police officers are not being called as witnesses to the grand jury, and as a city councilman, I want to know why, and I will publicly, repeatedly demand that from the county until they actually respond and actually start putting those criminals away.
Mr. Barber.
I want to apologize. Like Ashby, I'm a field artilleryman, and I cannot hear every question. Would you mind repeating it?
Be happy to.
We used to use cigarette butts as earplugs, and they're not as effective.
Crime is always a topic of concern for Jackson residents. What steps would you propose as a councilman to deter crime, and how would you fund your proposal? 3 minutes.
Well, there's no money to fund anything. You're going to have to do it with what you have. There are plenty of problems with crime. Most of it goes back to there's no father in the house. I'm running for Jackson City Council. I'm not running the whole country. The Jackson Police Chief works for the mayor. He does not work for the city council. I cannot tell him how to run his business. I would be glad to make recommendations. I knocked on the door of a gentleman the other day on Oak Canton Road. I won't say his name. He has recently moved back to Jackson. He was a member of the Jackson Police Reserve Unit 20 years ago. He said 10, 12 years ago, there was 230 reserve officers in this town. 230. That's 230 free cops. Not full time, but sometimes when you need them. Ball games, parades, on weekends, doing the drug enforcement. There's 30 officers on JPD's reserve now. I don't blame anybody. It's just the way it is. I would recommend to the chief to take some money, put somebody in there that can go out and recruit. Every time you have an officer on the street, that may be one officer you don't have to have on overtime. The city spends a lot of money on overtime. I want my officers to make as much as they can. Many of you may not know this, but 31 years ago, I was a police officer myself in Yazoo City, and I know what it's like to make a living in a uniform and a gun. JPD is underpaid. I'd like to pay him more. I can't set the pay. The mayor and the chief of police do that. But I would be glad to work with them in any way I can to cut waste on other programs and other departments to fully fund or adequately fund. When you say fully fund, that's a slippery slope. You know, fully funded in one guy's eyes is a lot less than the next person. I'd like to adequately fund the JPD and provide some financial assistance, or financial accounting to the JPD to work with that. We have a lot of good officers. I think we ought to support them and pay them like our life depends on it when we can. Thank you.
Susan and I were in Atlanta, and we moved back here home in 2002. About 3 years later, and we're on London Avenue, Little Europe, as some people call the neighborhood. About 3 or 4 years later, we got burglarized. We came in and stuff was torn up and things thrown everywhere. And the police came in, they gave us a card and circled the number for burglary. We called it. It was a disconnected number. You can't make this up. A year later, we had a burglary again. My law partner, I was out of town, my law partner came in, made them take fingerprints. They left a card, circled the number for burglary, same number, still disconnected. So I went out on my own. I went to 8 Amoco stations and tried to get tape from somebody that had stolen my credit card. Neither time did the investigator know that they were assigned to our case. The investigators in Jackson, most police departments, investigators it's promotion. You get trained, you get more money. In Jackson, our investigators do not get more money. They're not trained. They usually don't know they have some of these burglary cases. So one thing that we've got to do is do a better job of that investigation. And then Emil's absolutely right. When you get opium being sold out, Jimmy, from West Jackson at a convenience store, and there's a no bill on it, and you don't have police officers that are called to testify in front of the grand jury, that's a problem. And, you know, none of us are getting involved in other races here today, but that's a problem. And that's a problem that people need to be speaking out about, and you should be mad about it.
And a lot of everything goes back to who's doing the burglarizing, who's breaking in your house. When you've got a 50% dropout rate in the African American community, when you're not giving opportunities, that's where Alignment Jackson comes in, the educational program for ninth graders now, for freshmen. Nashville has a 40% increase in their graduation rates based on Alignment Nashville. It's something that not only we need to talk about, we need to do. And Carol Berger with United Way is being very active in that. It's a private-public partnership that we want to see get off the ground here. And you will see crime reduce when you give people opportunities, when they get their education and when they have the opportunity for jobs. Then there's less opportunity. Time is the devil's advocate, and there's less time and less incentive to come in. Thank you.
Our next question is, some members of